Kris, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Hey, Chris, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So, my name's Kris Burkhardt. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Accenture. For those of you who don't know Accenture, it's a large global IT strategy, digital agency company. We do a lot in that space, and we're north of 750,000 employees, coming up on 800,000. So it's hard to keep track of the exact number, but we're big. And so my role, of course, is to try to keep all of those people and our clients' data safe.
That's a big challenge when it's that large of an organization.
Absolutely, yeah, it really is. I mean, a core part of our program is really information security behaviors, and ensuring that our people are not paranoid, but that they're ready to spot scams because they are they do get targeted like everybody gets
Yep.
targeted, and we want to make sure that they're able to handle it.
So let's get this question up front and out of the way. You're talking about people being targeted for scams and whatnot and phishing attempts. Have you ever clicked on the phishing links? Have you ever been not so much, I think we've all been targets. Have you ever gotten down that pathway before you realized it was a scam?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So look, I don't know. We run phishing tests, like many companies do all the time. And so I don't know that I've ever been hit, to my knowledge, I haven't been hit with a real one yet, but I have failed our phishing tests before. So, it's the classic. I was in a hurry. I was looking at the email on my mobile device. I'm a little embarrassed to say that, I thought the company was going to buy me a free Fitbit, and it turns out they were not. That was a phishing test that my team had devised. So they got me on that one. But that's okay. I think when you fail them, and fail's a strong word. When you don't get it right, it's just a good reminder that you need to slow down and pay more attention to what you're actually reading in your email box, and it's good to have a healthy sense of skepticism
Yeah.
as you look at mails that are not from known correspondents.
Yeah. So I want to dig into this for a second because you said there was a possibility of getting a free Fitbit from the company. Is that, I know there are like life insurance and health insurance programs where if you wear a fitness tracker and you get your steps in, that you get a discount on your insurance, or it's just to
Hmm.
motivate employees to be healthier and more active. Is that kind of what went through your mind on
You
it?
nailed it. Yeah, that was exactly because I had the other part of the equation is I had just read about a program that we were doing, that did just that, right? If you led a healthier lifestyle, you could get a discount on your insurance or whatnot. And so, I guess my brain and the background must have connected those two
Yeah.
things and thought it was okay to click.
I mean, but that's, I mean, in some sense, that's what our brain is designed to do. It's designed to put things together and make logical connections. And hey, we were talking about having a healthier company, and here's this thing helping us to do that. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And with all of the media that we have coming at us these days, right? I mean, we all live in this highly connected, super digital society. It's a lot. It's you got to have an industrial strength filter like that's always on all the time.
Yeah.
No mistakes allowed. And so hopefully, the mistakes you make are small ones, like
Yep.
mine.
Yep. Hopefully, it's, we never like to make mistakes, but hopefully when we do that, the impact is as limited as possible. So, talking about impacts of issues, when we're recording this, this is 4 or 5, 6 days into CDK platform being down. Could we talk a little bit about why that's not your product and your service? This concept of we're so reliant on all these interconnected services that when something goes down, it impacts us in ways that consumers don't necessarily expect.
Yeah, I think it's a great one, and not to pick on CDK, it's not. There's plenty of victim blaming that happens in this industry, and I don't want to be part of that. Uh, but they're a good. They're sort of a good case to look at because of their broad impact. CDK is. I read online they're in I think 15,000 car dealerships. I think that's what they claim, and they are, and I think of maybe 20,000 in the US, right? So I'm speaking about the US here. So they have a huge market penetration, and their customers are not necessarily technologically savvy, right? That's why they use CDK, right? They don't, you know, they don't want to, car dealers don't want to be experts at writing, car financing software and inventory plans and, service scheduling applications, right? They rely on a company like CDK for all that. And I think many small
Yeah,
businesses, as we were talking about before, Chris, many small businesses rely on these software as a service providers because there's so much good about them. You don't have to maintain your own equipment. You don't have to think so much about backups. They do all of that for you. Like it's great. Like it's a
yeah,
really good thing, except when it goes down. And the reliance on these companies, I think, is incredible. Uh, but the CDK thing, I think as you were saying, consumers just don't understand how integral now software as a service providers are to our day-to-day lives, all the way from the real obvious ones like Gmail,
yeah,
like Microsoft 365 for many businesses. G Suite is the Google version of that, right? And so CDK, they provide all those dealership software packages.
yeah,
And without those, like you're not going to be able to buy a car, at least not easily. And you're not going to be able to schedule service. You're going to have to call the dealership. I'm sure they'd be happy to see you, but it's not as automatic as it once was. And hopefully will be again as they address their issue. But dealerships, they don't have disaster recovery plans. They don't think about business continuity, right? That is really in the realm of the service provider. And I think it just underlines, I guess, how important it is to have those kinds of plans and to ensure that your providers have those kinds of plans for you.
and this is not even specific to bigger industries like auto dealerships. Restaurants have open table and things that handle their reservations. If that
That's right.
platform goes down, they don't know who's made a reservation anymore. They don't know who's going to show up. They don't know where to seat people. They've got to go back to the old paper and pen methodology. Maybe for a restaurant that might be a little bit easier, but I can't think of an industry where there probably isn't a reliance on software as a service.
No, that's right. There really isn't. I mean, you can name all the little businesses that you're going to interact with every day, and there's very few where you walk up to the counter to buy what you're going to buy or talk to the receptionist or whatever it is that you're doing, and they're not tapping away into a computer, right? And that computer is almost certainly connected to some software package in
Yeah.
the cloud.
So as a CISO for both your company and your employees and the companies you work with, what are some of the things that keep you awake at night?
Well, that's one of them, right? I mean, if we if we think about service providers, cloud service providers in general, right? We have to get everything right kind of all the time, right? The defenders have to defend well, and we take a lot of steps to do what's called defense in depth, right? You have to assume that a layer is going to have a failure here and there again. And the analogy that gets used a lot, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard it, is the holes in Swiss cheese. And you don't want those to line up, right? But sometimes they do. But the more layers you have, the less likely it is to line up. So that keeps me awake is just, defending against all those attacks against assets in the cloud and, our, whether it's our employees' mailboxes or, SharePoint sites that house our confidential documents or, our finance systems, right? Making sure that those are secure, all the time. And with the changing technology, Kris, right? I mean, when you look at where we were 10 years ago, and you think about, the cloud was probably largely made up of virtual machines. You
Yeah.
can picture a physical server, and we moved it up into the cloud and said, okay, now we're in the cloud, and it's great. But now there's all sorts of variations on that. There are containers. There's what's called native cloud services. So, storage, I'll call them, you loosely call them databases, but storage utilities, there's compute utilities, and all those work a little bit differently. And they all have their own vulnerabilities
Yeah.
and they all require their own protections. So staying ahead of all that, it does keep me up at night. So I have some sympathy for the CDKs of the world, right, when these things happen, because it is hard to keep it all secure all the time.
Yeah, and it's hard to, on such a wide-ranging platform, to have that resiliency of if that goes down, how do we spin it back up again without the issue that caused the problem in an overnight or in one cycle.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I think, when I look at it and I look at how we manage our stuff, right? I think first you got to have a framework and the right toolkit to measure and I'll say correct your vulnerabilities and your exposures, right? That's super important. You have to understand what technologies you're using, and then you have to have the right tooling to ensure that those are configured properly, that you're keeping up to date with patches and all that kind of stuff. You also have to have a good, as you say, a business resilience plan. So what happens when you do get hit with ransomware? You have to have immutable backup somewhere. Um, you should know what are your critical systems, right?
Yeah,
What am I going to restore first? And how long is an acceptable time frame to restore those? For a company like us, where we report financials to the street once a quarter, depending on when that attack occurs, a few 3, 4 days down for those might be fine, right? That might
yeah,
be okay. We're still going to be able to do our work. For a company like, I don't know, Amazon, like if their main website gets hit, I mean, that's millions in revenue. I don't know, every minute
yeah.
probably, right? So, what does that look like? And so having that, restore view and restore plan, I think is super important. People don't always understand, which I think is ultimately the point here. They don't always understand their exposure to technology, and they don't understand the outsized impact it can have on what feels like a business that's not relying on technology.
Yeah.
But in fact, as you and I were discussing, all businesses are now relying on technology, right? They just really are.
I was working with some people that I know with their small business ones, and we're just kind of talking through the simple: do you have backups? How do the backups work? And it's funny. I think everyone talks about we talk the backing back stuff up, but almost nobody knows how to actually recover stuff.
Yeah, you got to practice. You have
and,
to
and
practice.
and that was the question that I had asked them. Have you ever tried to recover the data and restore it? And they're like, no. In fact, we don't even know how to do that. We've lost the manual for the software. And so someone would have to go figure out how to actually do this. Well, how long will it take? Well, I don't know. Again, it's one of those
Yep.
things. It's like, well, someone told us we need to back it up, and that made sense. But we didn't think about, well, if we ever had to use it, what would that look like?
Yeah, super important. You got to do it. You got to practice it. The other thing, Chris, that kind of keeps me up at night, and I was trying to think about how to say this broadly. And I think the best way that I can say it is I worry just in general about people's resistance to social engineering, and that has a lot of aspects to it. You can look at that from, all simple things like email phishing, right? People trying to get you to give up your credentials or send them some money or what have you, all the way, to changing our elections, right? Like, deep fakes of political candidates that in compromising our awkward positions. And I worry about our collective ability to really identify those and be resistant
Yeah.
to um, non-facts. Let's just say non-facts. I don't want to get political
Yeah.
here, but there's it's too easy, I think, sometimes to manipulate folks, and we spend a lot of time on that in our training. We spend a lot of time on how to identify social engineering in all its forms, how to think about it, how to verify through other channels, whether an ask is legitimate or an email is legitimate, right? So that one keeps me up at night. If we've got a little bit of time for a
Yeah.
story, we had an interesting one that happened. We had a threat actor attempt to convince one of our senior finance people to make a payment to them. And they created, based on some YouTube video that is out there of our CEO, they created a deep fake of our CEO, Julie Sweet. And they used that, and they were quite clever about how they did this. They had somebody pretend to be Julie on WhatsApp and send a simple text message over WhatsApp. And then they sent a fake voice recording of Julie. They used deepfake software
Mhm.
for to make it seem a little bit more real. And then the threat actor chose a law firm that we do business with. And that law firm had not registered the United Kingdom version of their
Yeah.
domain. So, lawfirm.com was registered, but lawfirm.co.uk was not.
Yeah.
So the threat actor registered that domain and as a follow-up, sent a Zoom invite to this senior finance person, and got the senior finance person on the call, got a deep fake video of Julie. Julie introduced the call, set it up. The threat actor pretended to be a lawyer from this law firm and had a discussion with our person about how they wanted the money sent, and all that. So fortunately, our person they were paranoid enough. They didn't quite make sense to them. They asked a few questions, and did not ultimately send the payment. Raised it to me and legal, and we handled the situation with them. But the threat actor was convincing, right? And the Julie, the Julie Sweet deepfake was convincing.
Yeah.
And it really took, I think, some of the training we gave the person, and their innate thoughtfulness about it to prevent that problem. There were some things that didn't add up. It wasn't a usual course of action for Julie to take. There was some generated urgency there,
Yeah.
right, that didn't need to be there. And, some of the same tricks that we see for social engineering all the time. But wow, between the deep fake and the good email domain, it was well executed.
Kudos to your employee for having the right amount of skepticism.
Yeah, that's right.
I always wonder if there's, it's we want people to have an appropriate level of skepticism because you don't want to wire money to people you shouldn't be wiring money to. In the back of my mind, I always kind of wonder if we're going to get to some point where, unless the boss walks into the room and says, "Do this," oh, I thought it was a deep fake.
Right, right.
I didn't think that was real, or that people are just going to push back on absolutely everything, and that is just going to kind of slow business down, slow people's ability. Like the distrust will become problematic as opposed to problem preventing.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you. And I have seen some colleagues get a little bit overly paranoid about stuff. I think, look, I think I said I grew up doing a lot of technology for the first half of my career. So my natural instinct is to go ask for a
Yeah.
technological solution to these types of things. And I think we'll get there, right? I think some of the things that we're seeing, um, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and others do with identity and identity verification, I think is going to make a difference there. I think it's as we roll on into the future through technology, I think we're going to see that it's a lot harder to take on a new identity or pretend to be somebody else online. It's and I think people will get much more will get much better using some of those tools at spotting likely deepfakes. And I think people get more comfortable at confirming through, alternate means.
Yeah.
So you send me an email, that's great. I'm going to call you at a number I know you own and confirm it's you. I think we'll see more of that. People are we're clever. I mean, we've been around for millions of years. That's not a mistake, right? I think we'll figure this stuff out
It,
and get
but
better.
but there is a certain amount of I have a little healthy in my mind healthy skepticism about a technical solution to a what I would refer to as a biological problem. It's people are using psychology and the way our biology works to bump us into a state where no matter how much logic we have and reason that we have and processes that we have, when we're in a great state, if someone can bump us out of that state by threatening us, scaring us, triggering greed, urgency, any
Yep.
level of emotion, kind of the rules go out the window.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It really is. And I forgot to mention in my deep fake story, the initial contact happened to catch this finance leader at an airport in between flights, right? They were distracted and they were probably more accepting than they would have been. So your point is completely legitimate. I do think though, and but also, I mean, scams have been going on
Yeah,
since the beginning of time. And I think this is just a new, easier way, soon to be AI
yeah,
powered, right? That'll get to all of us. But I also think maybe I'm just more optimistic. I also think our kids growing up with this, right? They are probably more cautious by nature because they've seen, they've seen so much of this. They've grown up in a technological world in a much different way than the world that I grew up with TRS-80s and old school tech, right? But I do think that we just simply must, hold some of the larger technology companies accountable for
yeah,
making it better, right? I think they've given us this wonderful gift of um, this massive digital society, which is great, but I think you can argue if that's healthy or not healthy, but I think they owe us some security to go with it, and I think they're trying, right?
yeah.
They may not get there as fast as you or I want, but I think over time, I think things will definitely improve.
Yeah, I think the guardrails, are things that are I don't want to call them an afterthought, but guardrails usually come later once you realize the holes in the technology and the holes in the process. I'm sure old highways never had guardrails. It was when, gee, an awful lot of people have gone around this corner and gone off the edge of the road. Maybe we should put something there to keep that from happening.
Yeah, I think so. We've there was a very public, I just spent some time with it. There was a very public report from the U.S. government agency CISA,
Hmm.
their cyber safety review board. In Congress, I think they had to go at Microsoft over one of their recent breaches, and asks. they had some very specific asks for Microsoft and other cloud service providers about identity and about resilience and about transparency and reporting. So I think there is, I think those guardrails are coming, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of the cloud service providers, in fact, not just them, any vendor, they're incented to get good products out fast,
Yeah.
and safety for a long, long time has probably always been an
Yeah.
afterthought, right? We didn't get seatbelts for a long time, we didn't get airbags until even later. And I think the same will probably be true here. And so I'm looking forward to my airbags.
And you and I probably grew up with lawn darts,
Yes, yes.
which anyone younger than us says, "What's a lawn dart?" And you'll have to Google that, and it'll be very clear as to why they're no longer available.
Yeah, I too had a set of jarts as a child.
Any product has the capability of making it to the market, but not all products can stay on the market.
Right. Very fair. Very fair.
So do you see deep fakes becoming more prominent over the next few years with just kind of the massive increase in compute ability coming
I
online?
do. So, we haven't talked too much about AI, and I'm not sure we're allowed to have a conversation without mentioning AI anymore.
No.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I think I see deep fakes. So first of all, I think there's a lot of things that AI is going to power in a security
Yeah.
sense, right? I think the initial balance of power is going to be, towards the bad guys. I think, AI generated phishing emails that are individually tailored for each of, 10,000 recipients versus, the generic Viagra ads we all got 10
Yep.
years ago, right? I think that's going to be pretty powerful. I think that AI generated deepfakes are those are only going to get better too. And I worry about individual tailored AI deepfakes, right? I've heard a terrible story about um, a deep fake phone call, that a threat actor created, allegedly from, this couple's child, asking for,
Yeah.
the child was in trouble, they needed money, right? So, I think we'll see more of that. I also worry about AI powered. We were talking about attack surface management earlier, right? And making sure that your cloud stuff is safe all the time. I worry about AI powered attacks against that. So what
Mhm.
happens when you give an AI a whole bunch of vulnerabilities to go try against, a particular company's set of cloud infrastructure, right? It can probably pull that off and chain those attacks together in ways that it used to take a human to do it,
Yeah.
and now AI can do it. But coming back to your deepfake question, I think those will only get better. Um, I know of several companies who do deepfake detection. A good use case there I heard is a call center for high net worth individuals, right? It's that a bank has. They're trying out some deepfake detection software with some success. That'll turn into a bit of an arms race,
Yeah.
right? So how do I outsmart the deepfake detector with a better deepfake? But I think people are really going to have to go back to some social engineering fundamentals and just really think about, hey, is this normal behavior for this person who's calling me? How am I going to verify that? Um, I need to follow my normal, if it's a business, I need to follow my normal payment processes. I'm not just going to take a caller's word for it, right? I'm going to get my colleague involved. I think it's going to be tricky for a while. And I think it's going to take a while for people to develop their own guardrails
Yeah.
and become a little bit more immune to this stuff.
I think you kind of you hit on it there when you're talking about the banking industry. It's we need to do as humans we need to develop a better sense of is this normal?
Yeah,
And if something starts to fall outside of normal, that even if it doesn't seem scary or concerning, that the hairs on the back of our neck to start go up when okay, this is not consistent with what I know of this person, or this is not consistent with the
Mhm.
way I see a bank operating. And that should help us in most cases to limit, to some extent, the interaction that could happen and the damage that could be caused.
Yeah, and just to come back to, I agree, and just to come back to my stronger digital identity or stronger technology, stuff. Digital identities, I think, are going to be important, and I mean that in lots of senses. We are at Accenture. We recently went passwordless, so most of our employees do not use a password anymore. What they do use is they either use their face or their thumb or a PIN code that's unique to their device. And that in turn unlocks, you can call it a digital certificate or a digital secret
Hmm.
that allows them to access Accenture applications. We're going to see that kind of technology more broadly. Microsoft, Google, Apple, I think, have all released passkeys now.
Yeah.
And we may see more of that in as other countries are in government interactions. We may see more of that in banking and commerce transactions. So different ways to really prove who you are in a trusted digital manner versus, what's your pet's name? What
Yeah.
street did you grow up on? Right? Like those, because those secrets are hard to keep,
Yeah.
but the digital secrets are pretty straightforward to keep.
It I start to think about, and I've had a couple of these conversations in the past, that we've worked so hard as a culture or technology or businesses on reducing friction over the last in transactions of any type, whether
Right.
it's I'm handing you something, I'm paying for something, that it's to me it's almost time to start adding friction back into experiences. Not to make life difficult, but to intentionally slow things down and make
Yeah.
things where processes become more enforced, as opposed to it's all about how do we get this transaction time from 10 seconds down to 8 seconds, rather
Yeah.
than the need for speed, the need for reliability, so to speak.
I think that's a great point. I think people feel, rightly or wrongly, people feel that there's a trade-off between efficiency and security. And I don't know that that has to be there, but I think recognizing that there's a place for security in transactions,
Yeah.
and that we shouldn't view that in a negative light just because it might be a little bit more frictional from time to time, or it might slow it down a little bit. I think that's a great point. I think about that commercial that was on, US TV not too long ago where there's some like, boppy music going on in the background and everybody's paying with their credit card and they're just tapping on
Yep.
the machine and then somebody suddenly like there's a record scratch as somebody pulls out cash,
Yeah.
right? To slow everything down, right? But I think it's reasonable to slow things down for identity and security if we need to. And I think in human interactions, it's a little bit harder to do. But I do think, when I think about whether it's an interaction with a professional worker like a doctor or an interaction with, my bank over the phone, um, I am always happy to take a moment to properly verify
Yeah.
and say who I am and do all that. But if we can do that better with digital identities, and people are willing to accept digital identities, that's another challenge.
Yeah.
Many people rightfully have some paranoia about too much government oversight, and they're going to know where I am and all that. And in the US, we're maybe a little bit behind some other countries on data privacy protections. But if we can get through that, right, I think we can see the other side and really protect everybody better than we do today.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting next few years in that space. There's so many companies with so many so many different ways of trying to manage that digital
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like it's a fascinating area. And as you say, there are many different ideas, many of them very good. some of them compatible even,
Yeah.
not all of them. And I'm sure, I'm sure as consumers and citizens, we're going to experience lots of them. I do think I'm looking forward to passkeys. I use like many people today. I use a password vault, right?
Yeah.
So I generate unique passwords for every site that I care about that I visit, and I'm looking forward to just using a more of a passkey system to have those, one step safer. Like that's great because once you get rid of a password and you have kind of built-in two-factor auth, like all of that nervousness can go away and maybe to your point,
Yeah.
even reduce some friction.
Yeah, hopefully it will in a good way. Hopefully we won't get to the point where we have to uh, uh, prick our thumb in order to open and
Right,
spill
right.
blood to open our front doors and things like that, just to prove who we are.
What was that movie? Gattaca, I think was that
Yes.
movie. Yeah, yeah, that'd be interesting.
I don't think we're going there. I don't think anybody wants that. We're not going to sequence DNA to open our front doors and get in our cars.
I sure hope not. I sure hope not.
So take a step back here and I'll ask kind of an open-ended question. So if we as businesses and consumers have to get it right 100% of the time, there's gonna be, there's gonna be, before recording, we're talking about the 99.99 sounds great, but that still means if it's 99.9% of planes land okay, no one wants to be on that 0.1% of a plane
Right.
that's not landing safely. How, what are some of the things that we could do to kind of build in, okay, if someone does get through the front door, if someone does get into a system, we do send someone money or we do let someone into a bank account. What kind of things can we do to mitigate the damage that can be done?
Yeah. Well, when we talk about security, right, at a sort of in a corporate sense, and I think this translates well across the board. There's prevent, there's detect, and there's respond, right? And so prevent, you can do a lot of defense and depth, right? You want to have a lot of layers. You don't want the holes in the Swiss cheese to line up. But once you get through there, you really need to be able to detect quickly. Like that's important. So, if you're talking about a company, a lot of companies have very tight monitoring, whether that's agents running on computers or log monitoring, and they keep an eye on that, and they have automated alerts set up, and maybe even automated responses set up when things happen. Personally, right, I think it's important that as consumers, we regularly monitor the critical accounts we use, whether that's an email account or a bank account or a credit card account. Um, Things that you want to know if something's going
Yeah.
wrong and you want to know sooner rather than later. So I think that concept of regular monitoring and just keeping an eye on things, I think is an important one. And then I think it's also a response, having a response set up and having a rational response set up. Like, okay, when I see a problem with my bank account, the rational response is, oh, I'm going to call the bank, or a credit card account. I'm going to call that. I think for businesses, right? I think you need to have that response set up, right? We were talking about that before. You need to know what you're going to do when you do have a ransomware event. So you can ideally respond, mitigate the spread, and recover quickly. Having that plan ahead of time and doing practices of that plan, even if it's just a tabletop exercise, like you don't have to necessarily plan out and practice how you're going to restore every
Yeah.
single system. You're going to want to restore some to know your technology works, but practicing with the people in your company or your third party providers, right? Your partners. A lot of these things happen these days since we're so interconnected. They happen across firms. They don't
Yeah.
happen to a single firm. So Do you know the people at the third party provider you're going to work with in case of an event? Have you maybe had lunch with them or had a conference call with them and talked through this stuff, right? I think those, I think planning ahead
Yeah.
for those scenarios is super important because you're not going to stop everything. We had a very public event at Accenture about 3 years ago, and while the actual damage to us was really nil, and to our customers was also, practically nil. It talking with everybody and communicating that was a challenge because there
Yeah.
were so many people we had to talk to. And we learned from that experience. Now we have the guardrail since we went over the cliff once, and we have a really strong communications plan, for example. So I think thinking through those scenarios for people is really important.
Yeah, it was part of an organization that they were working for through a disaster recovery plan. And it was interesting to find that there were so many places where we were thinking of like, okay, if there's a major earthquake and stuff's
Yep,
down,
of
Southern California,
course.
okay, well, if the internet's, if there's internet problems, you have to have a hard copy of how to get a hold of employees. So like someone needs to have a paper copy of these things, and
Right.
valuable customers and partners. We need paper contact information in order to be able to call them and say, "Hey, we're down. We're not going to be doing, X, Y, or Z." Or customers being able to, communicate with them. So it was really interesting to like have to think through some of the analog aspects of the communication of it. Is like, okay, so if that doesn't work, how do we communicate?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the basic things, right? You have to think about. And I think generally speaking, in my experience, at least with us and with our clients, it's rare that all your systems get ransomed at the same time or that
Yeah,
you lose everything. But it's important, I think, to think about what you're going to do in the case of your critical systems.
yeah,
And you may have different answers depending on different systems, and that's okay, right? But figuring that all out and thinking ahead, and to your point, hey, we got to go get analog again, right? Like, you better have a phone tree, right? You
yeah,
better have your contacts, your key contacts either already in your phone or on a piece of paper somewhere. Printers, you can print, printing's easy. All that kind of stuff. I think the other thing though, and it's funny you said it. I think the the general view of disaster recovery and business continuity plans, well, we still think about weather events and earthquakes and fires. I think many of my peers, at least, have really shifted their thinking. The primary event is now a ransomware event,
yeah, yeah,
right? Because that's the one that we actually see all the time. Not fortunately, not each individual company sees it all the time, but as an industry, right, we see them enough. And it was probably 3 or 4 years ago when people started to really mentally make that switch. Like,
yeah.
okay, right, we got to get ready for this because it's going to happen, and here's what it's going to look like.
Technology is now technology is an incident, an event now, not just
That's right.
a hurricane or an earthquake or things like that. So,
Amen.
as we wrap up here, any parting words of advice for either businesses or the general public?
Well, I'll say a couple things, right, that I think are important. And we hit on business resilience and all that. So I'm just going to say, you know, um, two pieces of advice that I've heard that I'll share with the audience. As deep fakes become more popular, I've heard of families using a code word strategy, right? And so I think that seems like a pretty good idea to me. And I would suggest, don't choose a pet's name, choose
Yep.
something that, people are not going to guess. And choose a code word that you can say that, yeah, it's really me, and it's not, I'm not stuck in Thailand with no money, right? So that your loved ones know that. I think the other thing I'd suggest, as I'm living through this personally, make sure that you're talking to your parents, especially if they're elderly, about scams and deep fakes and how real things can be. And help them understand and take control of their critical accounts,
Yeah.
and make sure that they're thinking about it the right way, and support them however they need to be supported. Because trust is, as I'm sure you've discussed on your show, is a difficult thing for older people. There was a
Yeah.
lot more trust, I feel like, 50 years ago than there is today, and there's not that natural skepticism that we have now.
Yes, absolutely. If people want to connect with you, how can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and my email address is Christian Burkhardt at Accenture.com. It's Christian with a K, and if you Google that, you'll find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
All right, super. Thanks for having me, Chris.
You're welcome.